brain is
Right.
always fooled every time, right?
Right.
So the
Right.
only way you can figure that out is by saying, oh, this fooled me because of this. So I know when I see this pattern, I'm always going to perceive it incorrectly. Like that's
Right.
just going to happen, and I have
Right.
to correct for that.
Jon Bownds, how are you doing, my friend?
Good. It's good to see you again. How you doing? How's your weekends?
It was good. It was good. We talked a little bit about the cabin trip,
Yeah,
which was beautiful. A little wild, 8 people in a one bedroom, one bathroom. but
it's a lot of people.
but there's so many beautiful spots like on the lakes out here. I don't think people realize, like, people think like in California or whatever, like it's all about the beach, but like there are some beautiful, beautiful spots on the lakes out here, I gotta say, you know,
Yeah, that's
it's a
awesome. I
lot.
need to see more of them. It's interesting. I've been in Austin 20 years, and I know I haven't even scratched the surface of a lot of the kind of natural beauty and outings that are available. So I need to do
Yeah,
more.
yeah.
Need to do
There's a
more.
lot. There's a lot to see.
Yeah,
So
it's a
how
good
are you
time for
staying?
it.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I was gonna ask, like, how are you staying sane right now in the time of COVID? Keeping yourself busy. What kinds of things are you doing to keep from going mad?
Yeah, that's a great question. For me, it's sort of just exercise is like the cornerstone of it. So I wake up every day and I run 3 miles just to
Yeah.
like get straight. And I found that I mean, my younger self would have laughed me out of the friggin' room. And also hated running, just hated running, thought it was not interesting at all. But I found that just getting 20 to
You're like a
25
big runner
minutes.
now.
Now I
You're like a
am,
pretty big runner.
yeah.
Yeah.
I do 5Ks. I want to train for a half marathon, but I found that getting 20 to 25 minutes of relatively high intensity, I should say, like exercise plays a huge role in
Yeah.
maintaining relative calm. And then journaling and reading and meditating and trying to allow for time to do those things amidst all the work that's going on and the parenting that's going on. It's crazy. It's for sure crazy. Like,
It is.
so
It is.
how are you? How
I
are you
had a
staying sane? You seem super sane to me. What's your secret? What can I get
I,
from
I
Caleb?
I'm doing some similar things. It's funny you mentioned the running thing because, I'll jog a little bit.
Yeah,
Nothing real crazy. I'm not like a real fanatic runner, but I had a buddy that like challenged me on Twitter, or whatever, over the weekend
nice.
to run like a timed mile, and he did like 7 minutes and 5 seconds or something. So I get into the gym today, and I'm like, I'm gonna beat that. I'm gonna beat this dude. So I get on the treadmill. I'm running. I take the thing up to like a 6, then a 7, and then an 8, and that's probably like my limit, and it tells me I'm on pace for like 7 minutes 30 seconds, and I'm like, all right, I'm gonna keep this going, and then I'm gonna like juice it up a little further so I can get under 7 minutes. And
Nice.
then
Under
after like
seven, dude.
after like 0.35 miles, something like that,
Hmm.
the joints were telling me like, hey buddy, this is
No,
this
it's a
isn't
hard
gonna
no.
happen. So I was like, I could push it and be like, joints be damned, but I've learned to kind of listen, to them, and so I stopped it at like 0.4 miles, took a screenshot, and I'm like, hey, I did what I could. Um, but it's annoying when your joints are the limiting factor and not your cardio, because you're
Yeah,
not even, you know what I mean? Like, so
super
that's how
interesting.
that
I've
went.
had the best I've ever gotten is like a 720 for 5K. So I had 720 for 3 miles. I wonder if I could sprint faster for just like a 1 mile stretch.
Oh, I'm
But
sure you could.
it's always been cardio. It got me. It's always been cardio. And
Yeah. So you don't have too
I
many issues with your joints.
no, and I did start to feel my knees when I started running, and I just sort of researched exhaustively what to do about it. And there are all these great little hacks you can do to decrease the um, I don't know, like pressure on your joints and how hard it hits when you're running. So if you take, feel like you're leaning forward and taking shorter strides, like you can,
Right.
um, it just, I did all of these things and it's, oh, there's these tools you can get with your iPhone where like, it'll tell you the number of strides per unit of time. And you want like, I think
Mhm.
around 80 a minute. And
Mhm.
so I just had this like metronome going in the background along with the podcast that I was listening to. And if I got that number of strides in, my knees didn't hurt at all. So it was
Mhm.
like it changed a couple things,
Really?
and it went from where I could feel my knees consistently. And I went to see a
Mhm.
sports medicine doctor, and I was like, I'm worried I want to keep doing this, but like I can just feel my knees all day long.
Wow.
They're like there to,
You
pretty much
basically wanna
completely
not
fixed.
feel your knees. You wanna just
Yep.
not you wanna
People,
just
they need to
not
be there. You know
this
what?
it
Really,
should
any part
just
of your body that is like sort of
yeah.
consistently like, I
You
don't know,
don't
pinging you.
wanna be
You
aware
want
of
to
it. You want it to
no,
just let you do whatever it is that you dream up
yeah.
and just to not at all be aware of anything. That's kind of like
Did
that's the
you did
ideal
you
state.
spend time pounding on your knees or joints before, like in sports or anything else that set you up for
I
like
kinda d
having that
you
as a
know,
limitation?
I kinda did like, I would jump off of like, as a teenager, I would
Yeah,
just jump off of random stuff,
yeah.
we had this like, it would have been
I thought you were gonna
parkour.
say, yeah, I was playing hockey or whatever. Like, I should
No,
jump off
no.
random
No, we
stuff.
just yeah, we would just like we would rollerblade, so we would do ramps and we would just like
Oh,
jump out,
that's
like we would
cool.
jump over bushes. It was kind of cool, but
Like skateboarding,
um
rollerblading, that's absolutely a sport, and I would imagine one that
yeah,
could be really difficult on your joints
I think
and
so.
and
I
everything
think
else,
so.
right?
And
Yeah,
everything else. Yeah, like if like these days, like if I jump off of something that's like over 2.5 feet high,
yeah,
I feel it in lots of different places. You know what I mean? But
yeah.
when I was a kid, I could just 8 feet, no problem, jump, land, roll, front flip, to a handstand.
So, Kayla,
Um,
I gotta ask you this: do you use parkour? Is that in your background too? You're doing like the sort of parkour moves? You're about to say
dude,
yes.
it would have been like if I was like 10 years younger, I would have been hardcore. But parkour wasn't really I think we were involved in whatever the predecessor
Predecessor to parkour
to
was,
parkour. Yeah.
yeah. It didn't have
Yeah,
its
but it
Daniel
wasn't
Craig James Bond moment yet, where it was in the mainstream.
exactly.
You guys made it
Exactly.
cool. You guys got
Well,
it
I mean,
kind of teed up to be cool.
I more or less. I mean,
Yeah,
I think it'd be fair to take partial credit for creating the sport of
you should.
parkour.
Yeah.
Um,
So let's just
but
have that. That's established in this episode that basically the
that's
progenitor of parkour, more
we've
alliteration,
established
is
it.
Kayla. Yeah.
We've documented it. There's
Yeah.
probably some cognitive bias
Ah, yeah.
in me
That's a good
thinking
segue.
that, right? So
Yeah.
it's a good
Yeah.
segue. So we're talking about cognitive biases. You're super into this. Like every time we like talk or go for a hike or whatever, we end up sort of talking about different cognitive biases. And you sent me this Wikipedia page with like
Mm.
over 100 of
I
these
know, right?
things, and
Yeah.
it's fascinating because I'll look at them, and some of them I'm aware of, some of them I'm not. But it's kind of mind blowing just how many there are. So how did you first kind of get interested in cognitive biases, and what are some of the ones that we want to highlight?
Well, it's sort of, so I mean, it's sort of two tier. I always sort of knew they were hanging around and that my undergraduate work was in neuroscience, and I'd done a lot of taken a lot of
Oh,
classes
really?
around how we, yeah, yeah. My undergraduate degree is in neuroscience, and I ended up publishing a paper on memories in undergraduate, and I was really, really into that
Oh,
sort of
wow.
before computers. I didn't even do CS stuff till like post college, really. But
Right.
yeah, so I was really interested in that sort of operationally as a college student. And then um I became really fascinated in terms of like, I was running and doing self-improvement stuff. I'm like, how can I be more effective? Productivity, stuff like that. And I think looking at time loss as a function of cognitive bias, or like decision making processes that could be more effective as a function of considering cognitive bias, started to become more and more attractive to me. And I saw it
Right.
in a lot of the like work that I was reading as well. And it occurred to me that just like pulling that out as a distinct topic, like the idea of cognitive bias and looking at like low hanging fruit around like obvious like errors in judgment that are
Mhm.
consistent, um,
Mhm.
that could be corrected for, right? I mean, I found that really interesting and fascinating. What blew me away was like how pervasive and consistent cognitive bias, like these errors are in general culture. So my
Mhm.
interest got like piqued by it, and I think giving a general background is probably worthwhile. Um, I'd say like really briefly, a cognitive bias isn't it's like a categorical error where like it's clearly either a sort of logical error or a statistical error. And so like a good
Mhm.
example of one of a bias like this would be, you know, when you're looking at a optical illusion, like
Mhm.
have you ever seen the one that has the line and then at the end of it there are two fins pointing this way and there's a line right below it that has two fins pointing out, and one line clearly looks longer than the other.
Oh, I've seen one of those where something looks longer than another, but,
Right. So you have two lines. They're equal to in one on the end of one, they're sort of like fins this way, and
uh,
on the other one, they're pointing in like this. And
yeah,
so like the lines are the same length, but they basically totally look different. And what's interesting about that is like the
right.
only way to see that is as like incorrect is by learning to like mistrust your perception, learning to
Right,
like
right,
assume that it's incorrect and learning like how to recognize that pattern and recognize
right,
that you're always going to perceive it incorrectly. You don't fix
right.
it. It's never like, oh,
It's
I get it now, so they look the same length. Your brain is
right,
always fooled every time, right?
right,
So the
right,
only way you can figure that out is by saying, oh, this fooled me because of this. So I know when I see this pattern, I, I'm always going to perceive it incorrectly. Like that's just
right,
going to happen, and I have
right.
to correct for that. So to me, cognitive
Yeah,
biases are like where, oh, I see there's this pattern. I'm going to perceive this incorrectly. So I need to be kind of ready to correct for it. And I think
yeah.
that's
I
super
I
interesting
think
to me.
I think, I'm sure there so it's funny because I saw this news story on, Friday. It was related to, like, Subway's bread, like, there was some court
Oh
case that
yeah,
there's
it's
too much
sugar.
sugar in it,
Yeah.
so it can't be considered bread, and I had this moment where so, like, we all know that there's a lot of news stories that aren't true or that whatever like, you headline read and then you find out so, I've started to have this thing where similar to that, and I'm sure there's specific cognitive biases related to news and things like that, maybe authority bias or something like that.
Hmm.
Um, but I had this thing where like I've started to kind of stop myself and go, wait, what if that's not true? And I was like, you know what? I think I'm gonna call BS on this Subway thing. Like, I don't know if I buy this whole sugar thing in their bread. Like, I've had their bread; it tastes like bread, but it's just
That's
kind of a
awesome.
funny thing. But it's like taking that whether it's news or whatever, taking that step to go like, "Oh, wait a minute. What if my brain is tricking me in whatever case?" Um, do you like when you're journaling, like, do you at the end of the day or what like, do you think back over the day and go like, "Oh, which biases did I fall into today?" Or is it more of like in the heat of the moment trying to train yourself to think differently?
Usually this first in service of the second. I mean, the gold standard for me is being able to in real time understand like when you're making categorical errors in judgment, but like I don't
Mhm,
think you can do that without practice. And I don't and
right.
I think that practice is basically represented by like what you said, which is like journaling and like kind of considering the decisions you made over the course of the day and how they
Mhm,
came to be, right? Um,
mhm.
and I think it takes, you know, I came up, like I was saying, actually in science, and sort of science has a tradition of like really sort of fervently trying to prove a hypothesis wrong. Like the whole point of it is you have to find any way that it could be wrong to get to the
Mhm.
right thing. So you're just
Mhm.
sort of desperately scraping out to figure out a way that it could be wrong. And
Mhm.
like I think there are a lot of contexts that is doesn't work in, that's unhealthy. But I think that being pretty determined to figure out if there are ways that you could be better, or you might have had some sort of error, can be really beneficial in my
Mhm.
experience. And so I think, what I took away from, I guess, the scientific method as a sort of central organizing principle of the work that I was doing at that time is that you can go a lot farther if you're really pretty ruthless about looking at where you're wrong and like willing to kind of
Mhm.
sit with that. So
Mhm.
yeah, I mean,
Mhm.
it's a I think it's a practice that leads to, I mean, increased accuracy, but also like I think you're generally happier as a person if you subject your decisions to that kind of scrutiny, in my
Mhm.
personal experience. So, um,
It's
yeah,
it's
go ahead.
kind of an interesting analog to like meditation in the sense that like when you're meditating, you're sort of this idea that every thought that comes into my head or every
Mm,
emotion I have isn't me or like isn't the truth. It's just it is what it is. It's a random thought that came into my head and kind of learning to sort of filter those and to not like immediately accept that that's all me, that's all absolute truth. It's almost like there's an analog there, right? Of like of
100%.
no, like sort of like you were saying, assuming that you're kind of wrong about a lot of things and you know that you are because like it's scientifically proven all these biases are operating at all times, right?
They're demonstrable, right? I mean, that's what's crazy about it. It's pretty straightforward once you take even a kind of slightly closer look at it. It's pretty straightforward for sure. But
Yeah.
I think you're right that boy, skepticism is sort of like a bad word, or it has a, like, I think, a negative ring as a function of how it's used in American culture. But like, I think being skeptical, healthily skeptical of thoughts that are arising or stuff that's coming up, and just being like, huh, does that track? Is a good practice. And so I think like what you're calling out makes a lot of sense, and not just. I mean, I think the American way is sort of to like trust your gut and go with your emotions.
Right.
And I'm going to
Right.
be honest. I think that like I've heard it divided this way, and I think this is true for any operation that has more than one step. Going with your gut's a bad idea. Going with your emotions is a bad idea. Like if there's a guy passing you on the left and you get like a gut feeling he's about to take a shot at you, that it might be true. Like really short sort of one step things where you're having an emotional reaction to it. I think that's a good context for gut reactions. But anything that requires more than two steps of planning, using emotions as a guideline to do that is like a bad I don't know, it's a bad process. And I thought that was an interesting way to frame it, and it kind of stuck with me as a way to
That is
divide,
interesting.
like, yeah, right, decisions that should be gut and decisions that probably aren't best facilitated by gut thinking, right?
Yeah.
uh,
It's weird. I have to say, like, I make almost all of my decisions based off my gut. It's probably it's probably a horrible thing, but, I don't know. It's like, I totally hear what you're saying, and we kinda talked about this the other day when we were, like, hiking that, like, certain areas of life, you might know you're doing suboptimally, but it's you kind of accept that fact that okay, it's fine because of whatever other priorities you have. Um, but yeah, it's funny because I think of myself as somebody that almost always makes gut decisions, and yet at the
I mean,
same
there are
time,
contexts where that's a great idea, but there are contexts where like you're being systemically taken advantage of either by an individual or like entity like Coca-Cola that understands cognitive bias really well and is like, well, this is the way
Right.
Kalen's gut works, so we're just going to go ahead and make
Right.
a couple bucks off that. And like, there's
Dude,
nothing wrong. Yeah, yeah,
I had the weirdest thought when I was looking at this list of cognitive biases, and I'm thinking about the news and politics, all this stuff that's going on right now.
yeah,
And I'm thinking to myself, politicians are basically growth hacking this
hmm,
list of cognitive biases. Is
100%.
basically what they're doing. They're taking
Yep,
that bias and they're growth hacking it as if it
yep,
was an SEO link or something like
yep.
that. You know, it's
No, there's this
unreal.
great book called Homo Deus by this guy Yuval Harari, who's an Israeli historian and like he's
He wrote Sapiens,
cross-disciplinary.
right?
He wrote *Sapiens* too, which
I
is
love that
also an
book. Yeah,
incredible book. So it's a
I
follow-up to
love that
that.
one.
The *Sapiens: A Brief History of Mankind*. *Homo Deus* is a brief history of the future, and he talks about what you're mentioning here, and kind of says, look, the church and government absolutely used to try to predict your cognitive biases and like how you're going to react to things and basically take advantage of that to structure your time and elicit desired behaviors from you. And he's like, but they were pretty benign and clunky. I mean, they were not able to do this in a really reproducible fashion or
Sophisticated way.
elaborate fashion. But you know who can? Like Facebook MFR. Like is getting to where there are actually entities that are capable of commanding attention and and generating behaviors as a function of understanding our cognitive biases in a way that is really pretty clearly directive. And that's crazy. So that like to have some semblance of autonomy or free will, if you want to call it that, you have to be really intentional. And that if you're following your gut, they know which way to lead you around. But all right, at that point, and
Hmm.
politicians and government are and the church are only going to be so successful in doing that with the data that's available. Entities like Facebook and other social media forums are much more able to lead you around by your gut, basically. So
Hmm.
I thought
Hmm.
that part of his book was really fascinating and like
Hmm.
kind of
Hmm.
dovetails with what you were saying around these different entities trying to basically hack our gut and use it as a tool to
Hmm.
understand how we're going to behave and then elicit the
Hmm.
desired response, right?
Hmm.
Behaviorally.
Hmm.
It's kind of
Hmm.
crazy.
Yeah. How do you sort of like bake this idea of sort of combating cognitive biases into your day to day? Like we talked a little bit about journaling or just trying to be aware of it. Like, do you have kind of like a systematic approach to how you work at it, or if somebody was trying to do a better job of it, like what would be a 1, 2, 3 step process for, because it's like one of those things that's so deceptive that you can be aware of them, you can hear about them and go, oh, cool idea, yeah, I should totally do that, and then you will proceed to promptly not do it at all, right?
It's so
Like, how do
true.
you do that? Yeah.
I think like that's a multi-part, almost multi-podcast question. And I guess for me, it's sort of a an ongoing process. And for me, almost on a cognitive bias by cognitive bias basis, I've been looking at ways that it's possible to kind of correct, especially for the most obvious ones, right? Where there's a clear benefit um, practically to correcting for it.
Mhm.
Um, so I think that there isn't an overarching. Oh well, I mean, I think an overarching. There are some sort of overarching um, steps or I don't know considerations that you can take uh, around decision making. So, like all decisions are subject to cognitive bias, and you're much more likely to fall victim to cognitive bias if you're sort of in a space of decision fatigue. And what that means is just you're out of energy, you're out of juice, and
Mhm.
you've like kind of really are either trying to process multiple things at once or you're at the end of your day. Um, and so I think that like overarching advice is like, if you're a morning person, make important decisions in the morning, or if you're an evening person, make important decisions in the evening. Don't make too
Mhm.
many decisions, like try to make too many decisions in one day.
Mhm.
Basically, things that prevent you from falling prey to cognitive bias as a function of like just sort of decision fatigue or exhaustion. So that's like a
Right.
10,000 foot. But then I love the idea, and I've been just going through like, how could you, for each bias, really take into consideration where it might occur and what you might be able to do to prevent it? Like in the case of the optical illusion, you recognize this pattern and you're like, hey, man, whenever this is here, I'm always going to see that line is longer. But I know it's not. And I can just know that every time.
Mhm.
I think that
Mhm.
like, it's almost on a bias by bias basis looking at how to correct for that, how to recognize the pattern, right? I mean, it's a pattern recognition game to some degree, and understanding where
Mhm.
your machinery is kind of failing to evaluate things
Mhm.
in a logical way. um
Right.
I think that, yeah, well, go
So
ahead, sorry, yeah.
no, 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 go ahead, please.
I was gonna say, like, the one I was thinking about today, I was thinking about what we would talk about, and one was like this sort of illusory correlation bias, which I just feel like is sort of pervasive, and a lot of funny work stories about it, and I think you see it everywhere. And it's
Mhm.
one that has kind of a pretty good hack for avoiding it.
Okay.
But basically, like, where there's a sort of, uh, whether it's related to, how close things are together in time, or like, uh, uh, the duration of things, like how basically, you see one event occur and then another event occur, and you assume sort of that there's a correlation between these two things, where
Okay.
logically it doesn't make any sense that there would necessarily, that correlation would exist, but we, as a function of how we view the world, will just draw that line 100%. um,
Mhm.
so like, I include some examples like, uh, a child forming a belief that all teachers are nice. So when she meets a teacher, she automatically trusts that person. Or a football fan believing every time he wears a specific jersey, his team wins. So each time they play, he'll wear that
Right.
jersey. There's correlation between these two things that don't necessarily have a
Right.
relationship. So I don't know. I think that's an interesting bias. And I think that, like, I run into it at work all the time, where,
Mhm.
like, even in troubleshooting technical problems,
Mhm.
the last thing that happened, clearly what caused the problem. And people will
Mhm.
hold on to that for
Mhm.
just like
Right.
hours, days, right?
Uh,
My
right,
experience is that,
right,
like,
right,
in
right, right.
any technical system, the larger the number of variables, the less likely it is that it's like the most recent thing that caused whatever you're trying to fix, like whatever you're trying to
Mhm.
troubleshoot.
Mhm.
If there are
Mhm.
only a few variables, that might be the case. But if you've got a ton, if
Mhm.
you've got a system like Laravel or Magento or something, like, somebody's gonna walk and be like, well, this just happened. So clearly everything
Mhm.
that's broken here is related to this. And you can just go down a wormhole and spend countless
Yeah.
hours, as opposed to using sort of deductive reasoning and really trying to test out hypotheses, and go in a different direction. And I found it crazy
Yeah,
to see.
it's always funny when, like, especially like somebody that's maybe like non-technical and there's a problem, and then like they're pretty sure it's this one thing is the reason for it, and
They're so
it's
sure.
not. It's they're
They're just
certain, like
so
they're
sure.
certain, and then you look at it and then because you've seen it before or whatever. You're like, oh no, it's this, it's just. And I mean, and it's funny because I'm the same way if it comes to some problem domain that I'm not familiar with. Like if there's something wrong with the air conditioner, like
Yep.
I'm the same person. I'm like, oh, I think it's because I pressed this button the wrong way or something. And they're like, no, it's the compressor. And
Yeah.
um, you know,
That's
it's
why there are those like signs from the plumber. It's like, $50 or $80 if you've already worked on it. or 120 bucks if you've got some advice, like how I should do it. And I think I think it's true. So like in terms of implementing this on a day-to-day basis, I've definitely found myself having that correlation, like, clearly this caused it, and walking it into a car dealership or walking it into somewhere else. And I think at my best, I'm able to like actually recognize it and just sort of abandon it and let people do their work. Like
Yeah,
that's the win in that context. Um,
yeah,
and then not let a correlation like that drive decision making. Right. I mean, eh, I think especially in the context of decisions around spend or running a small business, being careful about what weight you're giving correlative data makes a ton of sense for sure.
right, right.
But yeah.
Another
So,
one that I think comes up a lot is Parkinson's law of triviality, also known
oh,
as
I like
bike
this.
shedding.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I don't know.
I've
Tell me about it.
I've heard the phrase bike shedding before, and I didn't realize this was the sort of formal name. But so this is another one you hear a lot about in developer circles. Basically, the idea is like focusing on the trivial things as opposed to the important things. So
Hmm.
I think the term bike shedding originated where it's like the example is there's a group of people working on like a nuclear fusion reactor, and they're in a meeting and they end up talking about the employee bike shed and how to optimize the location of the bike shed for their, so, totally trivial compared to the actual mission. And I see this kind of thing come up when you're doing discovery on a project with clients or different teams, and you're trying to kind of focus on what are the most important things. And as I was thinking about this, I was like, I think this is one of the reasons why I mostly work solo, because I'm not good at dealing with those types of group dynamics, and I kind of just
Oh man,
opt out of them in a
it's
way.
brutal.
But I'm wondering if you have some ideas on sort of how to work around this bias, right? When working with client, when a client goes down a rabbit hole, or a team member goes down a rabbit hole on something, how to bring back the focus to kind of the main thing.
I mean, I think just having really, limited meetings and having a really specific agenda for each meeting and having like the outcomes that you want, like called out up front. And I think that bike shedding, what you're calling out, is totally a function. Like if there are a bunch of hard decisions and you've already made a couple, and there's some really easy decisions, you're gonna go start making easier decisions. Like you're gonna go solve easier problems as a function of just not wanting to continually tangle with like
Hmm.
you know difficult sort of problem solving. They're like figuring out where bike shed is not taxing. You don't feel tired after you've done it. It's actually kind of entertaining. Um,
Right.
and I'm with you in that it's really fundamentally sort of can be feel like a little bit of a waste of time to talk about things like a bike shed too much. I would say two things. One, I mean, the social is really important, and I think it's like significant, and you need to allow time for some discussion of just group topics that maybe don't have the most significant impact on the project. But then to the once I would build that in and be pretty merciless about agenda, timing, and like what you expect to get out of the meeting. Um, is my experience, and that's so much harder to do. I say that doing
Easier
it
said than done.
is a much easier said. It's easy for me to sit here and say that, and
Yeah.
like convincing a group of people, to stop talking about a bike shed or whatever, or keeping things like really sort of, I don't know, short. Either I think you risk, unless you're really adept at it, coming across as a bit of a like
Yeah.
a little bit dickishly. But I think
Yeah.
that I'm with you on it just being frustrating, especially when you kind of want to get back to work. Um,
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I think just if you are intentional about it and lay things out beforehand, you have a better shot at limiting the creep of that
Mhm.
discussion or meeting.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, you are an architect that has built an agency, sold an agency, worked for tons of merchants and things like that. And when you talk about meetings, like, do you have ways of, like you talked about, minimizing decision fatigue and maybe trying to do that with your clients, set up your meeting structures, project structures in a way to kind of maximize decision making? Like,
Mhm.
do you have any tips or structure for how you like to set up meetings, times a day, anything else like that to kind of, set things up for success?
For me,
Set
as
things
few
up
as
for success.
set things up for success is the title of your biography and your like new productivity book. The companion pieces. Set yourself up and like for
The
success.
DVD
Well, Kaylin
set.
on both. Yeah.
We got a DVD set bonus add-on for free.
Oh, I kind of love it. I think now you know what though, it's gonna be VHS tapes. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
We're gonna go all the
yeah,
way back and
all
like,
the way back, all the
you
way
know,
back.
anyway, I think I would say I try to make few high quality decisions and make them in the morning, which is my time. I'm just a morning person. And I do try to divide work into like work that's relatively administrative and then work that is can be exhausting and like
Mhm,
take a lot of out of you in terms of like important decisions. And so I would say I try to make one or two good decisions a day. And then I think about things, I guess, sort of as decisions and then actions. I just try to take as many actions as I can a day. So, like on the to do list, like there's just a bunch of stuff and like almost like getting things done style. Like, are you going to do it? Are you going to delegate it? Or are you going
mhm.
to, delay,
What with it?
defer
Do it.
it? And obviously, you want to
Oh,
do one of
right.
the two first options there whenever possible. And if it takes less than a minute, you should just do it immediately, right? And
Right.
so I almost sort of divide work into like bigger decision type work and then just trying to move things out of the way and make sure things aren't stuck. It's easy for things to get stuck, I think. So trying to remove
Right.
obstacles from people doing work is really important.
Right.
And it can be
Right.
challenging. But I mean, I guess what I've found is that like the primary things that end up getting in my way or cause issues for me end up being probably related to some form of cognitive bias. And if I'm intentional about trying to address that, mm, it's a better way of being slightly more effective. So I don't know.
Mhm.
And then
Yeah.
definitely
Yeah.
enjoying the work more. I think you have to listen to yourself and like when you like to work and how you like to make decisions. There's a lot of
Mhm.
individuality that goes into it as well.
That's funny. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. Like, it's almost like listening to your body, both physically and then kind of mentally listening to sort of your mind or your mental state, emotional state to kind of know what you should be doing. Like, do I need to go take a break? Do I need to go take a walk? Am I not focused? Like, almost taking a bird's eye view of yourself and going, am I focused right now? Am I not? Instead of just getting stuck in a cycle of like banging your head against the wall and not really getting anything done. Um, so that's another instance of that thing where you kind of have to remove yourself from yourself and think about, you kind of observe your mental state from the outside a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's true. I think it's really important to. It's funny because if you can become significantly less effective if you don't allow yourself time to unwind, don't allow yourself time to exercise. So like exercising takes up probably for me, if I'm being honest, 45 minutes to an hour a day. I mean, that's not a
Hmm.
trivial amount of time, but I'm certain, and I guess I don't really have the data or I can't quantify it directly, but this makes me want to go do it. I'm certain that I'm more productive as a function of spending that hour, even though,
Yeah.
it's time sunk, it's time spent, could be doing
Yeah.
other things with it. but I'm
Yeah,
pretty certain that without it, I'd be less effective. So I think you're right. I mean, you need to make time for multipliers, activities that you know are gonna
right,
make you more effective.
right, right. It's funny because, like, we were talking about how sometimes, um, listening to your gut is the wrong thing to do because you have all
Mhm.
these biases, but, like, that's an example where you have to listen to your gut. Like, how am I feeling in this moment? What do I need? What do I need to focus on to be productive or whatever? Um, so it's an
That's a
interesting
good point.
interplay between, you know, the
That's a
gut
good
and
point.
the mind in a way. Yeah.
I mean,
Um,
yeah, I think that's something that could be another series of podcasts too. But I think that like, yeah, you need to take care of yourself to some degree, and you need to be able to listen to your gut around whether or not you're going to be able to be effective without eating, without getting the appropriate amount of rest, without getting exercise. I mean,
right, right.
yeah,
So, confirmation bias is the tendency to focus on the information that confirms your pre-existing beliefs.
yeah,
Um,
it's a
how do you
huge one.
see this come up in your life, work life, and how do you work on minimizing that one? I know we talked a little bit about that already, but
Yeah, I mean that
there's some
loops
other
back around to
biases.
what I was saying or what we were talking about before around like the importance of um looking for how you might be wrong, because I think we're wrong much more than we realize that. We don't want to be wrong at all. But if you kind of go
Hmm.
after it, if you kind of lean into like, I'm going to be wrong, I'm going to be wrong 8x, a
Hmm.
month or something like that. And if I'm not finding that that's the case, it's probably me. I'm either not taking enough risk or I'm not being honest about what's wrong. I mean, I think that
It's
you'll really
almost like
benefit from it. Yeah.
yeah, it's almost like you could sort of journal at night and you could sort of like look for what was that like where was that one or two or three places in my day to day that I was biased? And if you don't find them, like you're missing something,
Yeah.
right?
I think it's true. There's
Yeah.
this great book called "But What If We're Wrong." It's about this guy named Chuck Klosterman, and he was a music journalist for like Rolling Stone, and he got famous for writing got famous. I think he really came to be better known after writing a book called "Sex, Drugs, and Cocoa Puffs," which was just like a series of interviews with different musicians. But like since then, he's written increasingly sort of philosophical novels, and then his most recent book, I think it came out last year. It's really great. It's like basically makes the assertion that like about 30% of the time, stuff that everybody takes for granted as being correct is just dead wrong, 100% wrong. It's just totally wrong. Like in the 50s, people were like, look, cigarettes are fine for you. And doctors are like, this is the healthiest cigarette for you. And, people were kind of leaning into it and they're just wrong. And there's so many other examples, right? Like
Yeah.
we used to think there were only three elements. I mean, just eh, his contention though is at any given time, like at least 30% of what we just all hold to be just evident is
Completely true
totally
is
wrong.
just wrong. Yeah.
And then his other contention is that like, well, I know we feel like it's not that way now, but why would now be any different from going back? And he
Right.
goes like he goes back 10 years and gives an example. He goes back 10 years before that. He's like, here's the 30% here. Here's the 30% here. And he's like, so look, right now, why would now be any different? There's absolutely 30% of what we just all hold to be self-evident is just not true. It's demonstrably not true. And it's
Yeah.
a great read. It's really funny. And I think it, begs the question of confirmation bias where like, why are we not seeing that? It's because we don't want to see it. It's not because you can't sort it out. I mean, this stuff ends up being some portion of it totally self-evident. But it's
Yeah.
I think because it's either uncomfortable to admit that you're wrong or socially uncomfortable too, right? I mean, to basically everybody uh if everybody agrees on something and there's a consensus to be like, Hey, so the emperor does not have any clothes on. It's a rough road. Like, it's not,
Mhm,
people are going to be like grumpy with
mhm,
you or
mhm, mhm,
outgroup you,
mhm,
especially if it's
mhm,
a sort of belief that's central to identity. It gets tricky.
mhm.
But I also think in about around confirmation bias, the people who are like sort of remarkably successful, and that's, could be defined different ways. But let's say like in the tech field, are people who are really good at ignoring, I think to some degree, I don't know, public opinion, but are good at like trying to sort out some of that 30% where we're clearly wrong, figuring out where that can be leveraged and just using that to their advantage.
Right, right, right. Yeah, like people who are, I mean, people who are basically right when the mainstream is going a different direction. Um,
Yeah.
is and people that have a historical track record of doing that is, I always think it's so weird that like in the news or whatever, people that are making predictions about X, Y, and Z, um, that there's no concept of like who has the most accurate track record.
No.
Like whether it's political
If they follow
pundits
your
or
gut.
whatever,
I like this guy. He sounds good.
or
This guy, I
right,
can trust this guy.
this guy,
This
I
guy
trust this
right
guy.
here, right here.
Look at this
And it doesn't
guy's
even matter. Like,
smile.
I
This
mean,
guy
you
is a
run it.
trustworthy face.
Yeah. Yeah. I think an interesting example of this is like, I mean, I had a friend who was like in battery science in college, and he's like, batteries are done. And I talked to another guy who rented me um, I'm living in Mueller and I lived in a rented place for a while and he was in batteries. And he's like, yeah, battery science, there is not a lot more to be done with batteries. And like, Tesla's done a lot with batteries and they just had like battery day. And I bought into this. I was like, yeah, the
Right.
physics of it's probably done. Like I didn't do the work
You're like,
myself to
yeah,
go like figure out, is this true? So even scientists, right, and even people who are roughly empirical are
right,
subject to this, right? I mean,
right,
it's probably true. And I'm sure there was some conversation where I was like, oh, so batteries are done, right? We don't, as opposed to going with a pen and paper and being like, are they really? Is there a way to like probably improve this? And I think that there's
right,
something to be said for going to first principles and like proving
right,
out your basis.
right.
You know what I mean?
I had a buddy that was tweeting, and there was a guy that put out some content about different e-commerce platforms, and then the person replied saying, "I think this is cool, good content, but I also think you're biased because the agency putting it out is using these platforms heavily, right?"
Hmm.
And he was saying, it would be cool to have like peer-reviewed research in this space of which e-commerce platform to pick, things like that. And I replied and I was like, scientists and peer-reviewed like they all have biases. They all have skin in the game
They
as
do.
well. It's different. It's not a directly a commercial thing, but like I know somebody who used to work for a PhD who like didn't randomize patients because they kind of were like, well, it's fine, it's fine. I mean, and they just wanted to get the result they wanted to get because they're a human being. They've been working on this thing for 10 years. They don't want to at the end of 10 years go, oh, I guess I was wrong,
Yeah, dude,
and
it's
it gets
hard.
messy.
And I think like you gotta understand like that guy wasn't doing science, right? I mean, he broke it. He for his own like, I guess he didn't want to feel bad or whatever you want to call it, but like if you're, what's good about science is that at the center of it, you're trying to show that
The only
something might
thing
be
that's like,
falsifiable or like, but
yeah,
he played with the results in such a way,
right,
right, that what he was doing was no longer science, right? Because
right,
you want
like,
to bake it into the process that there is some
right.
sort of objectivity.
Right. Like the only pure thing is the scientific method.
That's
That
right. I
that
agree with
is
you.
100%
That's it.
pure 100% of the time. But there's human beings trying to implement the scientific method, and then things can get fuzzy. And
I see.
double blind and things like that are in place to prevent that and to basically optimize for the scientific method. But yeah, scientists have biases and can do things for the wrong reasons or whatever and stuff like that. And yeah, it's interesting.
It's
um,
super interesting. I mean, we could talk about this I mean, I think it's definitely cognitive bias and the role it plays in how we make decisions personally and then how we make decisions as groups is just super interesting. And like I guess more important and applicable now than it's seemed to be to me in the past. Like
yeah,
particularly sort of like relevant now that you've got people competing for your time and attention with AI
right,
that's pretty good at figuring out how to get you to do stuff. Like
right.
intentionality in terms of understanding your cognitive biases and like seems like like a good effort.
Hmm. Yeah. By the way, do you have a stop right now?
I do.
Think of our call. Yeah. All right. Good times now. Well, there's a lot of fun. Where's the best place for people to find you online?
Um, I have what is the best place for people to find me online? I think I don't have a significant online presence, so I would say that like I'm on LinkedIn at Jon Bownds, and that's probably the best place to hit me up. If you have any questions.
Cool. Awesome. All right, man.
All right,
A lot of
we'll do
fun.
it again
Talk
soon.
soon.